Welcome to the CEIE hybrid webinar on Pathways in Solidarity, Faith Action Network in Washington State, with Elise DeGooyer and board members and advocates of FAN. My name is John Malcolmson, and I am the CEIE coordinator and use he and him pronouns. We are grateful to be here in Seattle on the land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people who have stewarded this land for countless generations. We are aware that acknowledgement is not enough and commit to the continued efforts of repair. The Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University is committed to providing all kinds of rich opportunities for communities and students who are both very near and far away. Through hybrid formats, such as this format today, we work with partners to create events, workshops, and educational offerings, such as this webinar and our monthly webinar series. We are grateful to have you with us for this hybrid webinar as we imagine and shape this experience together. Today, we welcome Elise DeGooyer, Executive Director of Faith Action Network, CEIE Advisory Council member and Seattle University alum, who is joined by FAN board members, Dr. Jasmeet Singh, Reverend Carol Jensen, and Dr. Edward Donaldson III.
Thank you, John. You've been great in bringing us together for this, and we really appreciate Seattle U and the center especially for making this happen. I would like to introduce our panelists today. First, to my right is Dr. Edward Donaldson, who is also a FAN board member and is well known here at the center and at the School of Theology and Ministry, where he has led the Doctorate in Ministry program. He's the pastor of Kingdom Family Worship Center in Kent. His webinar from October can still be viewed on the center's website and focused on his book, The Black Lives Matter Movement Toward an Intersectional Theology. Reverend Carol Jensen, to my far right, has served as FAN Governing Board Chair since the beginning of FAN. She retired from serving as pastor at St. John's United Lutheran Church for many years. And as most activists' retirements go, she is now currently serving as interim pastor at University Lutheran Church. Carol has a grounding in many social justice movements over decades of activism, and we are hopeful she'll tell us about some of that today. And Dr. Jasmeet Singh has been a Washington State resident since 2002. He is the founder and board member of a national civil rights organization, the Sikh Coalition, which was founded on the night of September 11th, 2001, in response to violent attacks against Sikh Americans throughout the United States. He's also a founder of a Washington State nonprofit, the Khalsa Gurmat Center, that was formally incorporated in 2014. The organization is focused on education, empowerment, and civic engagement for kids and community members. He is also a member of the FAN board. Thank you all for being here. So I'll just begin with gratitude for those who are gathered here in the room and those who are joining us online. I was really honored to be asked as a center board member to facilitate this webinar about FAN and the faith inspiration for the work we do. And since it's the center and the university, I thought in true public theology form, some theological reflection was in order. Our organization is more known for action. We sometimes joke, action is our middle name, Faith Action Network. And it's really true, it fits us. We tend to move quickly to affirm our shared values among faith traditions, like care for our neighbors and an orientation to justice. And then we move from those points of connection to work for social change. Let me start with just a little background about FAN, since there may be some of you who are just hearing about us for the first time. Faith Action Network was formed 11.5 years ago when the Washington Association of Churches merged with the Lutheran Public Policy Office of Washington to become a new creation. At the time, it was clear that the way forward was to be interfaith, allowing multiple faith traditions to work together on social justice issues. Carol will talk a little bit more about that later. We are still growing into that identity now with over 164 faith communities that have pledged to take action with our network and thousands of individuals across the state. While we started more in Western Washington, we now have statewide board members and staff, and there's much more exciting room for growth there. Some of what we do is build relationships and convene people, organize around social justice issues, bring faith voices to about 30 secular coalitions that we work with on social justice and racial equity. And we join or facilitate vigils and marches when the need arises. Much of our work takes place at the Washington State Legislature, so we're known a lot for that, where we advocate with our elected officials for the changes we want to see become law. We also advocate on issues in Congress, especially for how they impact our state. Our mission is to be an interfaith, statewide partnership, striving for a just, compassionate, and sustainable world through community building, education, and courageous public action. It's a mouthful. It's what happens when you bring all your values together, but there's a lot of room in there for actions we do take together in solidarity with other faith groups and in our local communities. And we're always evolving. Today gives us a chance to share some ideas about this concept of solidarity and to deepen the conversation with each other and with all of you. We chose the theme Pathways of Solidarity, thanks to inspiration from Jess, our organizer in Wenatchee, who works closely with immigrant communities. Because there was not one way to solidarity, there are many paths. We want to honor our pluralistic society and multi-faith movement that respects various ways of moving forward together. Something that's not that popular these days when we pit groups against each other. And solidarity is not a destination or place you arrive, it's a process and way of being. At FAN, we're learning to live into that process. So I just want to share a few initial thoughts and turn it over to a conversation. We most often think of solidarity as unity, as standing together. That's a given and a really good place to start after these disunified and polarized years of the pandemic. Building a sense of relationship, interconnection, and oneness is powerful alone. Solidarity in the work we do is also a political value, for sure. Our union friends teach us that every day. Just yesterday, I was able to stand with some unionized laundry workers who are asking for respect in their ongoing contract negotiations. And they expressed real joy. It was palpable that other people were there yesterday showing up for them in Kent. We give thanks for our union friends who show up faithfully for each other's causes at the workplace and on the picket line. Faith communities have been long part of that. In my own graduate studies in Latin American liberation theologies, I learned very tangibly how solidarity is also a deep spiritual value. It is what enabled survival and resistance during the US-funded wars in Central America. And we had many examples of people of faith living in solidarity with the struggle and suffering the same martyrdom with the poor. But today I want to talk more about solidarity as a way of life, a way of putting our faith into action. Here in the US, I see faith communities live out solidarity every day in all the ways you open your doors to your neighbors, provide meals, welcome immigrants, visit prisoners, and more, with a solidarity that goes beyond the providing of services and includes mutuality of learning from and walking with our neighbors. Solidarity meets advocacy at FAN when we can bring people's experiences and voices to decision-making tables to help impact public policy. A spirit of solidarity that says we're all in this together means our care for one group can also lift whole communities. This is just one way I see solidarity and advocacy working together. I have many examples of this, and we can share more during the Q&A and hear of yours too. But here's one I know best from my previous work. When faith communities who provide food bank services that keep people alive also come to decision-making tables and say they're doing their part in making sure their neighbors don't go hungry, and then changes are made to SNAP or food stamp benefits, and as a result, more people have their own resources to buy groceries during hard times, then hundreds of thousands of people in our state suddenly are fed. In my Christian tradition, we call that multiplication of loaves and fishes. And it happens not just by miracle, but by the hard work of solidarity and advocacy. I've come to believe that solidarity is a space where two other powerful spiritual values, love and justice, meet. So I'm going to say that again and try it on and let me know your thoughts about it in the Q&A. Solidarity is where love and justice meet. I found also the best way to learn more about solidarity is to hear other people's perspectives. And that is why we have a panel today, not just one speaker. And we want to make time to hear your perspectives too. So they'll each have 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have some Q&A for further clarification of thought. I'd like to turn it over first to Carol to start us.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you also Seattle University for hosting us today. It's good to be back here. It's been a few years, and also for this opportunity to share more about the work of Faith Action Network. I'm going to begin by sharing a bit of my own story, pick up on some of the points that Elise already touched on, and then offer a few reflections. My personal journey connecting faith and action for justice and peace began over 50 years ago when I was a student at the University of Washington during the 1960s. And my Lutheran campus pastor connected the biblical story of the exodus from slavery to freedom to struggles for liberation in our own time. And he showed us by his own example how protest and advocacy were integral to living a faithful life. And that experience has shaped me to this very day. I had the opportunity to see people of different faiths coming together in support of civil rights and against the war in Vietnam. And I joined the staff of a faith-based organization, peace and justice organization, Clergy and Laity Concerned, organizing faith communities against militarism and for peace and justice. So fast forward through a stint in the Middle East for the American Friends Service Committee, through seminary, and then coming to Seattle as a pastor in the 1990s. I got involved with the Lutheran Public Policy Office, and especially with its work to influence state-level public policy. And as I worked through LPPO to build predominantly Lutheran-based faith communities into a network to have an impact on those policies, it was so apparent that, not just to me, but to our LPPO leadership, that working with other faith-based folks would give us collectively so much more impact. So we began to dream not only about working with other Christian denominations and with the Washington Association of Churches, but of building a truly interreligious, multi-faith organization to impact the policies in this state in the direction of greater justice. So FAN was born out of that vision and out of that desire, as Elise already mentioned. It's an important distinction, I think, at least to me, and I think to maybe some of you, that the impetus for FAN was not our seeing a need for a multi-faith religious organization in Washington state, like some kind of religious council, but rather seeing a need for a moral, faith-based organization for social and political change. And joining with people of many faiths who share that commitment was the best way to move forward. Now for a few reflections on solidarity as it relates to FAN. Fundamentally, our diverse faith traditions call us to love of neighbor. To me, that's the root of faith-based ethics, not only for Christians, but for other faith traditions as I understand them. So in the Christian scriptures, and I come from the Christian tradition, we have the story of Jesus and Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan. There's a lot to ponder in that story. But one key component is that being a neighbor means responding to the person in need. Our neighbor is the one that God calls us to stand with in their suffering, in their oppression, and in their experience of threats to their security and well-being, and then to advocate both for and with them. That's a framework for faith-based solidarity. And in a sense, all of FAN's work is encompassed in that framework, but there are versions of this. FAN's policy work, which Elise has referred to, whether it's, and we have a broad array of policy work, but whether it's to, change our unfair tax code, to feed food insecure children, to protect the planet, all of this flows from an understanding that this work benefits our neighbors in need. And neighbor includes not only human creatures, but also the planet and all created beings. So that's one kind of solidarity. Another dimension to our solidarity work is FAN's diverse faith leaders and communities standing with those who have been attacked or threatened by violence and hatred, especially when directed at members of particular faith tradition. So that sometimes involves public witness at a place of worship, such as the time that many faith leaders went to the Muslim Association of Puget Sound MAPS after its sign had been vandalized, or organizing interfaith events after hate killings, such as those at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, or maybe 10 years ago, I think it was, at the Sikh Gurdwara in Wisconsin. So our solidarity may also involve, as Elise said, taking to the streets or standing in front of public buildings when policies that threaten whole faith communities like the Muslim ban are put forward. So increasingly that solidarity that is focused on standing together against threats, especially to non-majority religious traditions in this country. Threats that are rooted in racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. Recent escalation of hate speech and action has led FAN to be more explicit in its speaking out against white Christian nationalism. White Christian nationalism is a threat to the multi-faith character of our nation, as well as to particular faith communities. And it's also a threat to the constitutional protections for religious liberty that we cherish. I can say more about that later, but I'm going to pass the baton back to Elise.
Thanks, Carol. That's excellent. So next, we are going to invite Dr. Jasmeet Singh to speak to his perceptions of solidarity and from his community.
Thank you, Elise. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. I wish I could have been there in person, but I'm so glad for this opportunity to really have this engagement with everyone there. We are always, more than the sum of our stories. And my hope is that what we share today collectively will resonate with you too. I will start with something that is very close to my heart and was instrumental in how my life changed after 9/11. Violence and discrimination are problems that affect all Americans. And it could stem from one's faith, color, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. In recent years, Sikhs, Muslims, Arabs, Jews, Christians, Hindu communities have all experienced hate incidents. It's in our nation's public schools, children who wear head coverings like Sikhs, Muslims, Jews are vulnerable to bullying. Regardless of whether a Sikh man wears a turban or a Muslim woman wears hijab, both may face employment discrimination as job applicants. What I realized is we must fight back against injustice and hatred and create a society that is rooted in love, understanding, and acceptance that protects and serves all our families. Too often, communities that experience discrimination do not share their common experiences, pool their resources, or fight these problems together. We must mobilize our people and resources and ensure that our organization can stand shoulder to shoulder and defend those in our communities who are most vulnerable right now. And we must lay the foundation of a strategy to transform our democracy that is not based on hate, rhetoric, and xenophobia. Faith Action Network has really allowed these distinct faith traditions to come together and look for common solutions in both political and social space. It helps build mutual understanding and respect among different faiths. It recognizes that despite the widely prevalent diversity of religions, ethnicities, cultures among us all, we can live together by sharing our value system. And this can be achieved through action-oriented dialogue and collaboration to find solutions to problems with love and empathy. The first and the foremost thing that has been is to identify the differences and similarities among the people, and then learn to understand each other, build good relations and mutual trust without sacrificing our individuality. Quite often it is said it is during our darkest moments that we must focus to see the light. And Carol actually alluded to that already. And that light manifests itself when we stand together in strength, whether it's a massacre of 6 in the Wisconsin Gurdwara, the mass shooting of Black Christians in Charleston, anti-Semitic hate in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, or when Muslims are butchered in the 2 mosques in Christchurch. It is a recognition that the same light manifests in each one of us. Every Sikh ends the prayers with an ardas every day in their lives. Nanak Naam Chardi Kala, Tere Pane Sarbat Da Pala, which really means that Nanak implores everyone to do good and ask for prosperity for everyone. When I think of the work we've been pursuing together, the primary focus has been to safeguard the rights of individuals, to promote people's aspirations for happiness, to protect nature, to show solidarity with the victims of injustice, and to struggle for peace and justice. What does fans' solidarity mean to me? It means to create a lasting friendship across the different faiths, to work together, to plan together, organize together, march together, learn from each other, break bread together, and stand together, to create the much needed space in our communities to talk about individual and collective struggles on race, privilege, social justice, xenophobia, to address the homelessness in our communities, to reduce incarceration, to improve the wages, to improve police accountability, and to protect immigrants and their families, and really come together in action and solidarity with peace, compassion, and love in our hearts. So thank you again for giving this opportunity, and really appreciate that we all have this space together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Next, we'll have Dr. Donaldson.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you to the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement, Dr. Trice, and all of my other esteemed colleagues. It's so wonderful to be here with other FAN board members, some of whom it is our first time to be in person together. We've done this work virtually for so long, so it's quite a pleasure to be here. Let me start by talking about the story of the Samaritan that Reverend Carol lifted up. In many faith traditions, it's known as the story of the Good Samaritan. In my own faith tradition, we don't call it the Good Samaritan, we call it the Samaritan, because we read this idea of a Good Samaritan as either xenophobic or racist, or it is a way of othering this particular Samaritan and making that Samaritan exceptional. So we'll talk about the Samaritan just very quickly as I find my way into this conversation. And that is, in the story of the Samaritan, there is a man who is on a road, and on his journey on the road, he is beaten and wounded and left for dead. And the Samaritan comes and becomes his rescuer. What is never focused on is the road itself, because apparently it's commonplace that people are abused on this road. And the question that emerges from that is, whose responsibility is the road? While we have focused so long on the actions of recovery of the Samaritan, what Faith Action Network seeks to do is to be responsible for the conditions of the road that make the wounding possible. And so that's kind of how I start this journey, asking who's responsible for the road. My thoughts along pathways to solidarity as a Christian Metacostal, grounded in intersectional theology. The idea of solidarity is central to our understanding of the teachings of Jesus. The metaphysical teachings of the law of the divine oneness, which say God is one and in fellowship with God's self, leads us to understand we indeed as human beings are one. So it's Jesus' prayer in the that we might be one that becomes the impetus for our way of being in the world. And the ancient biblical writers indicate that there is just one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God in us all and through us all, so that everything we do affects the whole. Everyone is equally important as a part of the universe. Our understanding is that the back of all things, the substrate of everything, is one. If we're recognizing our oneness with the divine, we cannot pray for or work for anything for our neighbor, which is not good. We see each individual as ourselves, knowing that the other is a myth created by systems such as imperialist, capitalist, anti-Black, cis-hetero patriarchy that work against human flourishing. Dismantling systems of oppression that could marginalize those on the underside of power and privilege then becomes central to the activity of faith in the world. This is where Faith Action Network really is generated from. The Pentecostal tradition, in my own Metacostal entrance into today's conversation, is one that from its inception at the day of Pentecost over 2,000 years ago is subversive and transgressive. The divine encounter at Pentecost was about the miracle of radical community. Groups previously divided, now experiencing a desire to be with and for each other. The ancient experience of Pentecost was an event that happened in the underbelly of Roman Empire, contra-colonial occupation and religious persecution. It was an event initiated by dispossessed Jews who articulated a new egalitarian community, not grounded in violent hierarchies that worked to dehumanize. Ancient Pentecost was about fashioning patterns of intimacy and belonging within an imperial context of division, fear, hatred, and despair. Pentecost sought to reverse the oppressive status quo in Rome. Again, this for me is where Faith Action Network is born in me. Modern Pentecostalism was emancipatory for the minoritarian in that it featured minoritized leadership from Black men and women of all races in an era where Black men were regularly lynched for looking at a white woman. At the founding of the Azusa Street Revival, Black men laid hands on women to pray for them. In terms of emancipatory gender norms, when the congregation organized itself, the 12 elders comprised 5 men and 7 women. While several denominations that sprung from the movement lost its liberatory lens, the truth of Pentecostal heritage can never be revoked. The third movement that brings me to this work is intersectional theology, and it's rooted in shared marginal relationship to dominant power that normalizes, legitimizes, and privileges those dominating powers. It is the alternative that is emerging, which exposes the weakness of norms that have become the foundation of theological houses too small to hold all of the family of God. Intersectional theology is a heuristic constructive theology that engages a hermeneutic of hunger, that reads our sacred text as an answer to what all forms of oppression bring to bear on human dignity. It has not been suspicion that turns people away from the church. It's been hunger that drives them to seek help wherever their rights to have life are being disrespected. Intersectional theology engages this hermeneutic of hunger that realizes theologies develop in response to questions arising out of specific intellectual, political, and religious situations. And it takes seriously the lived reality of our siblings who suffer under all oppressive structures, and most specifically those who suffer under multiple oppressive structures simultaneously. This Metacostal and intersectional theological home brings me to the work of solidarity undertaken by Faith Action Network. For me, the whole of sacred text in the Christian tradition is a religio-social engagement with politics and government that is always moving to repair. FAN seeks to engage the work of solidarity through just policymaking in our particular democratic republic. It's the living extension of the gospel of Jesus, which begins in Luke 4 as Jesus' self-declared mission is to bring good news to the poor and to set at liberty them that are bound. Uniquely, FAN is able to engage the work of my own faith tradition while joining me to other faith traditions without any contradiction, because we all take seriously the solidarity and unity of all. Faith Action Network represents a challenge to the American religious tendency toward personal piety over societal reform, as though one could be personally pious without working towards social reform. I'm honored then to serve as a board member of Faith Action Network as we continue to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly toward a more just and humane world.
Well, I would give all of our panelists a round of applause and just thank you for your presence here. And you see why none of us really want to follow Dr. Donaldson. So we'll just question all the panelists, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Donaldson. I've got a question for each, and then we may have some questions for each other, and then we'll respond to the Q&A questions that come up. So there's many questions, many follow-ups. Love, whose responsibility is the road? Really, I'm going to take that in a different light as we think of pathways. Yeah. But to just be clear, you ended with this reflection on restoration and repair. And I just would love to hear what you think that looks like for the Black community in Seattle, in the Central District of Seattle, in Kent, where you serve. What does restoration and repair tangibly look like?
Wow, that's a powerful question, because we see clearly, particularly in the Central District, a gentrification that is actually being covered over by an attempt to make symbol of the Black community. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of Black art being put on white-owned buildings that have displaced Black-owned businesses, as if the art can somehow replace the economic infrastructure that made a voting bloc. We see an attempt to look like repair that isn't actual repair. Mm-hmm. I think as it relates to faith communities, I think what repair looks like is community of means, allowing communities of lack to have access to funding without control. Many times when communities of the dominant culture partner with minoritized spaces, they want to maintain control of the spending and have fiduciary responsibility. What would happen if those funders gave folks autonomy and agency to spend the finances in the way that most served them? That's what repair looks like. Repair looks like places like Madrona Grace, right? And that congregation receiving the funds that they would have gotten when their property was sold to maintain the property of the dominant congregation, right? What happens when you make then the amount that property would be sold for today a scholarship fund? for Black and brown folks to have access to higher ed so that they're not put in that position again. Those are the types of things that are actual movements to repair in the face of rupture.
Thank you. That really helps to have a concrete lay of the land, real roads and real faith communities. Thank you. I wanted to ask Dr. Singh, really moved by what you said about the light that we share, especially to see how you operate that in real life and how you help form young people to be activists. As you talk about mobilization and action-oriented dialogue, also like that phrase a lot. I think that's what we're talking about at Faith Action Network is action-oriented dialogue. Both are important. When you are exposing youth at the Khalsa Center to social issues, and especially if they involve communities at a distance, say like the Indian farmers movement in recent years that you called us into, even though we don't do a lot of international work, but because of how it mattered for you all here, how do you begin to build the empathy and the bridges of understanding with youth, especially that you work with?
Thank you, Elise. Again, one of the greatest things about being able to meet people from different faiths and communities is that you come to realize the need for your own education about the issues that affect us all. And that has really led us to consciously design programs at the center to create understanding and empathy where none existed. Let me give you a few examples, whether it was actually understanding what it was to be an anti-racist, where we work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression through education, dialogue, action, to make our communities more inclusive and equitable. That cannot happen unless we acknowledge and correct historical and current systemic injustices, as well as highlight the often overlooked accomplishments of those who have been oppressed. So the dialogues that we created with the youth really helped to inform them and kind of created a compassionate and truthful space, striving to open their minds and change their hearts through knowledge and conversation. While we were doing this, we also recognized that the farmers halfway around the world in India were sitting in freezing rain, away from the families, on the roads with nothing at all to have their voices heard. The farmers' protest was peaceful, and yet it met with toxic mix of indifference, slanderous defamation, and active repression, including tear gas, water cannons by the government. We realized that it was not okay for just sit out as mute spectators. So we realized that by amplifying their voices, we could make sure that they were not subjected to repression and violence. And that is what led us to reaching out to all the communities under the FAN umbrella and really talking about how important was it for everybody to come together and take a stance, or at least show that they were watching, so that nothing wrong could be committed in the long run. And frankly, I think that is what helped to make sure that the entire thing ended peacefully, and they were able to dismantle the 3 farm laws that they were all protesting against. So I feel that when you are able to motivate the youth with all this information and empower them with the information, they can do wonders. And I think that behooves us as leaders in the community to be able to include them in those conversations and get them involved in real action. And that is what I feel FAN allows us to create a space to do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jasmeet. So Carol, I always so appreciate the depth of your wisdom and experience. And we've done a lot together in my 9.5 years with FAN. So I just wanted to ask about something we were involved with in 2017, where FAN helped organize efforts to stand with our Muslim neighbors when hate groups like Act for America were coming to town and trying to rally their forces. What do you think we learned then that applies to how we might stand in solidarity against the white Christian nationalism that we are seeing raising its ugly self today?
Yeah, that just a couple of things about the context for that. I mean, in 2017, we weren't that long after the election of Trump. The rise in hate speech was shocking and a real threat to the things that we hold dear. And when this group was going to come and have their anti-Sharia demonstration, it was not only concern to us as faith-based organization, but it was a source of rallying around for left groups in this city, the political groups. It was a phenomenal, it could be a case study, but there was concern among the faith folks that what might happen in a clash between the right groups and the left groups, that it could, potentially be violence, would not serve the Muslim community. And so we had some really, tense negotiations. And in fact, FAN decided to not endorse the counter march to counter this because we were worried about some of that. But we did have a presence at the rally, very strong presence, and some people did march. But in any case, and so we had a very powerful meeting here in this place in Campion. One of the things was control of the messaging. We were really concerned about the messaging. And, I remember one of the left groups, they were going to have their signs, and they would be on TV. And we were really worried how that could play out and how could we have an impact on that message. And I don't know if you remember seeing these 5 years ago. We produced a bazillion stand with our Muslim neighbor signs. They ended up all over the city, faith communities, and they ended up all over that march. And at least visually, that became, that was a predominant message, even though at the end of the march, there was some violence. And of course, King TV filmed that, and it was part of the public messaging, although there was some more nuanced reporting on some of the radio shows. So part of the learning about is how do we, especially when there's how do we work with other progressive groups that may not share all of our values? How do we be clear about our own messaging, which for us is, well, we will be in the streets. We are not for the use of violence and demonstrations and self-defense, which is, is part of the issue. Well, if the police come after us, we can go after the police, but no, that is not sort of where FAN lives. And so the impact on messaging, I think the public presence was really, both the march and the vigil there were really important. I mean, we basically just completely overpowered that puny little, I'm sorry, but Act for America rally. It was just kind of, they had their speakers and so on, but we really took the wind out of their sails. I think that had an impact on how many such rallies there were subsequently, because they didn't want these counter protests to take away their limelight. The action itself, this is part of the essence, I think, of Faith Action Network, is when we do things like this together, it does an enormous amount to build relationships and solidarity within our network as we are there, standing in a line, holding our signs. I mean, I think right now of a relationship between two people in particular that really bonded at that time, and that was Sister Anila and Jonas Davis, who just passed away, Jewish and Muslim. And the bonding that happened during that, I think, has been a reserve for us to draw on as we face new challenges. There was struggle, and then there was trust, and trust was built. That helped build the foundation of how we move forward together. And so I think all of those are important for now, and that we can't be silent in the face of this. I mean, it just, and that we need to be strategic about how we carry that voice publicly into the public square. And I don't think we're doing probably enough about that, but it's a challenge.
Thank you. So I just appreciate you all and your partnership in this. I also am very well aware that as a multi-faith organization, we are missing a Jewish voice today. We're missing a Muslim voice today and a Buddhist voice. And I'm not going to speak for them, but I want to say that we acknowledge that and that their voices will fill in the rest of this conversation as we continue it. I hope for the year, at least to just flesh out the things we haven't thought of. With Jewish voices calling for tikkun olam, the repair of the world. I've heard Muslim voices saying, pieces of the Quran that speak to violence done to one is as if you injured all. And then what we always learn from Buddhist voices about sitting with and where our being in the present calls for action. I always learn from that. So we will fill out those pieces as we write and talk. I hope you will too. If there are any Q&A that come in from the Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist community, I would like to lift those up since you've heard from us already. Before that, just want to say, Carol, Dr. Donaldson, Dr. Singh, do you have questions of each other? I asked my follow-up. I tend to like, those specific stories or how things work out when we're talking about concepts. And you did a really great job with illustrating that. So any questions from either of you or Dr. Singh?
I'm curious, Elise. You mentioned earlier, solidarity is where love and justice meet. And I've kind of been wrestling with that as we've been sitting here, because I wonder if justice is possible without love, or if love is possible without justice. Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public. Say a little bit more about love and justice meeting in the place of solidarity, because I think there's something there to mine, and I'm trying to get at it. Can you help me with that a little bit?
Well, there's exactly why I said it and said it twice, because it just kind of came to me through this, process of writing down my thoughts and I'm not sure it fits yet. I'm not sure,
Like it.
but I like it because our faiths call us to love and we work really hard at that, don't we? And sometimes we say we don't have time for justice or we don't have time for politics because that's not love. How can I love and do this very bifurcated sometimes or polarizing thing? And so that's why I want to bring them together, but I'm not sure it works. I'm not sure. Those are great questions. Can justice be achieved without love? No, but solidarity is deeper when we bring those two together. It is what justice is what love looks like in public. I also really believe that the people I've known who have lived solidarity the most deeply have merged love and justice in a very powerful way. So let's explore that more. Or do you have a response?
Yeah, and no, I think for people of faith, bringing together love and justice is, they're just totally intertwined. And if we work for justice without love, we're sometimes drawn into our work for justice. The work for justice should then never, cancel the love that, it's kind of a circle in a way too, because sometimes work for justice can in fact end up suppressing love or being even hateful. And I think perhaps that's one of the things that faith communities need to bring into the wider progressive movement is that intersection of love and justice. And, then the solidarity thing is, that's a way of looking at what solidarity means. It's not only our compassion for people and their suffering. Yes, the poor Samaritan, I love the thing about the road that I never had heard that. How do we build a different road so that will not happen?
That's really helpful because that helps me as I think through cancel culture.
Yeah.
Where the work of justice begins to exclude love.
Yes.
Because our need to be right supersedes our need to be in relationship. Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
I will say that we were in a meeting with my Congressman, Adam Smith, and having a good conversation about where we're at in Congress and the divisions. And he said something, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a call for how do we bring people together again? How can we bring people together to talk again? And I just kind of jumped in and said, faith communities do that all the time. He goes, I know, that's why I'm asking you. So I think we are called somehow to bring those things back together. And, you know, there's hard love, there's demanding love, there's speaking truth to power kind of love. Dr. Singh, I see you unmuted and ready.
Yeah. So, you know, I was trying to reflect on this and really thinking about some of the times that I've really been moved. And one of the times that I remember was a forum on police accountability. And I bring that up because, you know, we talk about love and justice. I don't think that you can really have justice till you actually start identifying with the victim, right? And that comes through pure love. And, you know, I heard a mother really talk about how every time that their son leaves the house, they don't know whether they're going to come back or not, right? I could not have imagined that, right? But hearing her talk about it, hearing her really express her frustration in people not understanding what it's like, right? When you try to put yourself in those shoes and you try to come with love and empathy and understanding, then you realize that the justice for that mother is as important as you're trying to do the work that you felt was important. I mean, it was such a remarkable, like, I can't even express the deja vu moment, like, you know, it is an awakening, if you will, of my really understanding the insecurity that persists in a mother's heart when they don't know their child is going to come back safe in the evening. And the way it was beautifully expressed and the love that I felt for that mother expressing those things really touched me that day, that would always be an important part of my life, working towards asking for that equity, asking for that safety for every child, no matter what community they belong to. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, when I look at it from that perspective. That is almost a call for action, that if I can't make another child safe and their mother to be so insecure about them, then we are failing in the communities that we live in.
Thank you. Very good. I really appreciate your clarifying thoughts. And we may have a little bit more time for that, but I want to make sure there's time for the Q&A. I know there's a couple questions in there. And John, do you want to ask that or should? Okay, great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Love and justice, we could go on for quite a while. The first question is about solidarity from one of our online attendees. FAN has participants from many religions and denominations. Some may have doctrines that oppose some of the solidarity stands for social justice in which FAN is active, such as LGBTQIA+ rights or women's rights. How does FAN seek consensus, and to what degree before FAN is an active advocate for, therefore, how is FAN an active advocate for these marginalized communities?
Well, I'm just going to start and then give the other panelists a chance to weigh in if they'd like. I just want to start by saying today's a great day. Today, Congress actually passed the Protection of Same-Sex Marriage Act. And that is a huge win. And that is something we celebrate at Faith Action Network. Does everybody in our whole network celebrate that? I don't know. But what I want to say is when we came together, as FAN, and I'll let Carol respond to how this happened, but you know, we specifically said we are not going to say we're everything to everyone. We can't, we won't we won't move if we do that. So we specifically said we espouse progressive causes. And sometimes that's identified with one party over another, but it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't mean that we are party affiliated. but it sometimes can look like that because of how our values are expressed in the public sphere. So today we celebrate same-sex marriage and await it being passed or, signed into law and protected. That didn't come around quickly and easily, and I'll let Carol speak to how they came to that decision. It was before I came. It was a process. And the thing I want to say before you say how it happened is these are three board members and myself out of 10, out of 11 years of many people who are picked to represent, not like officially represent their communities, but to gather in the wisdom of their communities. So with those people as board members who care about deciding, what feels right for FAN at this time, those decisions were made. Carol, what would you add to that?
No, I think that's very well put. And I think when in my opening remarks, I made the comment about we were not seeking to build a multi-faith, sort of religious council, but rather, a faith-based voice for social justice. And some of our early, former board chair was very keen on that and key in that, Reverend Rich Gamble, and how, and that was important in discerning, who to invite to be part of the board. I mean, also, I have been surprised, a progressive Christian. I think oftentimes we sometimes have views of traditions, especially those of us who are Christian and look out at, Muslims, Jews, Sikhs. We have stereotypes sometimes about, that the issues within those and how that would constrain their action. And in fact, those communities are also diverse, and all of our communities are diverse. And so, there are people in all those traditions that draw on their faith values to advocate for justice. And those are the people that gravitate to FAN. And so we've had remarkable unanimity. I mean, and we actually this year, I will say, we never had taken made any kind of statement or advocacy related to the issue of reproductive rights. It stayed away from that, and partly because we thought that might be it's history of relationship to Catholic community, Roman Catholic community. But this year we did make a statement. It was a narrow statement, but and we made it as a board. Not so much taking a position on abortion, but just looking at the decision and what its relationship to human rights as we saw it. But I think that was also possible because of the trust that we built together, and recognizing it's a fine call, but that we don't have to all be equally on board or passionate about everything that we advocate for. So it's kind of a pretty organic and a bit of it's relational, recognizing that all faith traditions have people within those traditions that are struggling with dimensions of those traditions, whether we're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, we struggle with parts of our own history and heritage, and that we draw on that same heritage for our passion for justice, both of those things. That was my Reformation sermon. There you go.
Thank you. Edward or Jasmine, would you like to reply to that? Respond?
Dr. Carrie Day, in her latest book, lifts up a concept called progressive masculinity. In her work, she intimates that to be an ally for a womanist or Black feminist as a man does not mean one has all of the right answers or that one knows how to respond to every situation properly, but that it is progressive. That once one has determined to be an ally, one may still wake up tomorrow and make decisions that are antithetical to one's allyship. But you wake up every day with the determination to continue to be an ally. I lift that up only to say that Faith Action Network has a determination to continue the work of allyship, to continue the work of partnership, but it is progressive. I think that the progressive movement has reduced itself to a bit of a fundamentalism. Like there's this liberal fundamentalism that there is one way to be anything, but to truly and authentically be progressive is to know that at any moment, one can be on the wrong side of anything at any time, and one is always open to learning how to be better, open, more broader, more deep. So when the question comes, how do we deal with folks who may not be on the same page? We do so from an understanding that we are all progressive, that we are loving one another where we are until we can be where we will be. And I think avoiding that tendency to liberal fundamentalism is what keeps FAN moving in a progressive. We could not have 10 years ago made any statement about the abortion issue, and we can a decade later make some statement about the abortion issue. I personally sit on the board for the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Was the statement broad enough, deep enough, full enough for me? No, but the fact that there is a statement means that we are progressive. So in a decade, maybe we'll make another statement that is deeper and fuller and will continue to be who we can be in those moments.
Thank you. To say again, who you referenced in the beginning, in case anyone.
Dr. Carrie Day.
Carrie Day.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Her latest work is Azusa Reimagined. It's just one little nugget out of a much larger tome.
Jasmeet, did you want to respond to that question?
I don't think I have too much to add to what all three of you really said. So, but again, I think every time that we've had those very difficult conversations, there's usually an invite to everyone on the board and others to say, here is the issue. Here is how we stand, right? Like, what is your opinion? And that opinion is accepted, whether you agree or disagree with that. Right. And I think that's the beauty of the whole thing, right? At the end of the day, you may not have unanimity, but you may have something that comes to that is not offensive to any of the traditions. And I think that's the one good thing on how it is framed. You ask for everybody's feedback. You don't water it down. You still have it standing out there as an important element of what you are standing up for as an organization, yet at the same time, you are respectful of other traditions or other viewpoints that may exist within the board. And I think that's what I like about the way we've approached some of these issues.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. And when we don't get it right, we need to apologize,
That's right.
to understand, and see if there's another path forward together. I think we had to rebuild trust with some people after we took previous stands, but in the cases where there was openness to conversation, I think we were able to do that.
I think we wanted to give one chance at least to one of the folks here in person to ask a question.
My name is Zachary. I did have a couple questions. My first question, Dr. Donaldson, I hear that reference to the road, and I really appreciate that imaginative and openness of thinking. And it gets me thinking specifically about the road in our society and the people we see on the road. And so I'd like to ask you more specifically, what do you believe is perhaps more important to take into account? People who maintain the road or the people that walk on the road?
Fundamentally, I appreciate the question, and simultaneously, I want to alter the premise because I don't see a hierarchical need to focus on either or. I honestly believe it's a both and. There's no way to make progress without both considering the people who are on the road and those who maintain the road. If I focus only on the people who are on the road, then I am tempted to engage charity without empowerment. If I focus only on the people who maintain the road, I'm tempted to focus on justice that lacks the love we talked about earlier. I think what we have to do is we have to take a many-pronged effort. And we have some folks who will work with the folks who are walking on the road and some folks who are working with the folks that maintain the road until the conditions of the road change. If I'm going to lift anything into supremacy, it will be the condition of the road which has impact both for those who walk on it and those who maintain it. Hope that's helpful.
Another question from the audience, or did we want to? Yes, okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'd love to ask one. My name is Sophia, and Elise had a similar question earlier, and this has kind of been touched on, but this is for anybody who would like to answer. So I find that in order to tackle internal bias and harmful stereotypes people have towards religious groups, there must be a deeper understanding and education of these groups. What are some applicable and approachable ways that people can learn to embrace more loving kindness and acceptance for our neighbor?
I tend to be a person that starts with like, well, education and so forth. But in my experience, that probably the single or most effective way, let's just put it that way, is for people to encounter each other, and that hasn't been easy in these days. I'll just tell a very quick story. We were at, we had a lot of events related to Islamophobia, and sometimes they drew some protesters, and we had one at a Lutheran church in Mukilteo, and there were people there to challenge the Muslim woman and so forth. And my husband engaged with one of them afterwards, one of the people that came to protest, and at the level of ideas, he was completely opposed to Islam. But then, do you know any Muslims? Well, yes, and some colleague of his, well, what about him? Does he believe? Oh, no, but I know him. And I've seen that over the course of my life. So for people that aren't academics, that don't do a lot of study of dialogue, that to the degree we can create situations where folks can actually meet, whether they're organized, where you have a panel or something, or you have a dinners, that those kind of, there's more to say about that. I know some of our colleagues are working on that kind of opportunities for those kind of encounters.
I'm sorry, I was trying to look up a name, but that escaped me. But thank you for that question. I think you're right, the encounter. And I also think there's some really great examples of how people build those bridges right here. So the center is you all are doing an excellent job of building ecumenical and interreligious understanding and relationships. And I'm excited to see that grow. I think there are people on the call that I see that also have been working on interfaith, getting to know each other, and then building actions and movements out of that. I think the Poor People's Campaign is doing an excellent job of building the kinds of solidarity that we've been talking about today as well among people impacted by policies. There's just so many examples around us. The standing with our Muslim neighbors signs that Carol talked about, that was really the group Paths to Understanding that kind of launched that. And Terry Kylo and others are doing wonderful work in trying to figure out how do we begin to bring people out of their silos. All of these efforts together, I think, make us a stronger force for good. And FAN is here to take it to the policy realm. So do you feel like your answer? Yeah. Anybody, did you want to respond to anyone else? Oh, Jasmeet is unmuted, perhaps.
Yeah, again, the same thing, experiential is extremely important, right? Till you actually experience another community, are in their space, interact with them, eat their food along with them, that's what really creates the human element of really understanding another person, right? Otherwise, if we are only in an academic setting, right, that only goes so far. But when we are in each other's space, that's when really true understanding comes through that interaction and exchange.
I'll tell one more story of that, and that's a real testament to the Sikh community and your sense of hospitality, is at the Parliament of World Religions, which Dr. Trice, who's with us, is on the board of. I've had the good fortune of attending twice. And here's this conference in a big conference kind of area, but the Sikh community puts out a langar or free lunch for everyone each day. Every single day they feed 10,000 people. And it's an incredible feat. And we sit on the floor together and eat a simple lunch and really learn about others' practices. So I love that I guess I always go back to the food and the hunger piece, but I do think our breaking bread together is a really important piece. Was there another question?
Okay, we have another online question. Will FAN be sponsoring an in-person faith advocacy day in Olympia this year? If yes, will you be organizing bus transportation as in the past? And will there be advanced training sessions and by experts, because those were so rich in the past? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, because that's part of my closing statement. So I'll just include it here. Is absolutely, it is the work we do. We do a lot of other things, but it is the concrete work that we do. So we're just moving out of having a wonderful annual dinner with 350 or so of our strong supporters across the state. It was hybrid. We figured out how to be in a room together in Renton and Spokane and online, and that was good. So we're going to try to do the same thing with advocating, and it's going to be a little tricky, but the legislature will be back in Olympia this year. So we plan to have an Interfaith Advocacy Day in Olympia on February 9th. It's a Thursday, all day. You come down, usually start at 9 and at 3, includes visits with your legislators. We'll figure out how to do that hybrid too. Some pieces of it, perhaps, hoping the legislators will meet with us in person. So all of that is getting put together, but I want to put those dates out to you. So that's February 9th. Moving backwards from that to prepare for those days and prepare for the legislative session that starts on the second Monday of January, which I believe is the 9th. Yep. We will have some pre-legislative session trainings on Thursday, January 5th. We'll do a legislative preview. Our legislative agenda is a kind of organic, like you've seen here. We're just talking about it. We have a pretty good sense of what it might look like, but our policy committee needs to review it, pass on a recommendation to our board, which will vote on it on December 20th. And then we'll have a legislative agenda. That's not just one issue or area, because we're a broad network and we have lots of people with interests, various interests. So it will be a multifaceted legislative agenda. And we'll preview that on January 5th in the evening. If you sign up for our emails at fanwa.org, you'll get information about that. On the Sunday before the legislative session starts, on January 8th, we're going to have an Advocacy 101 training for people who said, oh, I'm not sure I know what to say to elected officials, or does this include me? My love is acted out at my faith community. Why go to Olympia? Or why weigh in? This will be a little refresher. Advocacy 101, how to raise your voice. In Spokane, our partners there are planning their Eastern Washington Legislative Conference, and that's at both in-person and online, for January 21st. So there's a Spokane conference that has workshops and speakers that we hope, people in Spokane area can go to. But then leading up to February 9th in Olympia. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure that we'll have buses, but we'll try to arrange carpools for sure. And then we'll try to provide some online opportunities.
Great, thank you so much. And did we have any last statements that anyone wanted to make before we wrap up our webinar?
Well, so we could start with Dr. Singh, since he's ready.
Thanks, Elise. Again, I believe that, when we come together, we can achieve big things. Coming together is really a beginning. Staying together is like making progress, but really working together is what success needs to look like, right? When we develop the understanding, when we come together, work together, and collaborate with understanding and respect, then we're able to achieve great things. And that's what FAN has been trying to do, right? Whether it's shaping the policy, whether it's changing the minds, whether it's advocating on issues that are important to us. So I really want to invite everyone who's attending today or is viewing this to really understand what the work is and get involved in your own communities in whichever way makes sense for you. But not doing that or sitting on the sideline is not an option. You know, we have to be actively engaged on things that are meaningful. Thank you again for giving us the space to come together today. Seattle University, really appreciate your giving us the time.
Dr. Donaldson or Carol?
Just to say, I have been so grateful for this opportunity. And as I was listening to my colleagues here, I just felt like this is FAN happening here. You know, this is not just us coming to do a talk. This is an embodiment of us. Now, mostly we don't talk a lot like this at our meetings. I mean, and we don't, and that's partly why I treasure this. Like, you know, we are about our agendas and what we have to get done. So this is very rich. And I hope other people will have a chance to watch this. So gratitude, and for you making this happen for us. It's a gift. It's a gift. The thing, just show up. You know, I mean, we don't have answers to everything, but you know, when there are, you know, marches from, you know, St. Mark's or St. James or about different issues, when there are events where people come together, you know, when there are opportunities that you see on your Facebook feed or whatever, your social media feed, you know, show up if you can in person, if you can do that. Now, not everybody can do that. I understand it's great to have hybrid opportunities, but if you are able to, if for various reasons, if you're able to show up, and the relationships, they will come, and out of those relationships will come your action.
I'm just really grateful for the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement and for FAN. I happen to work in both, and it's great to see these worlds come together and work together. This was great. This coming together, staying together, working together is going to sit with me for a long time. I guess let me close with this. We are in a time of deep polemics, polarization, juxtapositions, but as much as our heads are different, our stomachs are the same. We've got to get to the place where what really matters is what matters. And that's the work of FAN, is making sure that we keep the main thing, the main thing.
Thank you. Well, thank you, board members and our staff not being present. They have a lot of deep thoughts about this too. So we'll lift up their voices in the future. Do sign up for our emails at fanwa.org, because that's how we get the word out when you're working in a statewide coalition. You know, you kind of depend on the written word a lot. And some video now. We have some video. But most of all, I want to thank the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement, because you're doing a new thing too. And you're helping us clarify our thought and making forums where there weren't forums necessarily before. So really appreciate it. Appreciate the beginning of what does solidarity mean. I think we got a good start.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all for being here today in person and online. Thank you also for watching and sharing. If you are enjoying this recording online, at this time, the Center for Ecumenical and Interreligious Engagement at Seattle University would like to wish you well as you take this experience and learning out into the world. May you imagine, may your life be shaped by what you have learned or thought about today. May you be curious as you wonder at the world around and inside of you. May you be happy. May you have peace in your soul and share it with others. May your mind, heart, and spirit be open. May you and those you love be well. Thank you all.